Hello and welcome to Technique Friday. Today I'm going to talk to you about water-soluble markers. And I have a couple of sets of these. I have some Sakura koi pens and of course letra sets. Now there are a number of different water-soluble markers on the market and I don't have the full set. I have the full set of the koi because I bought them like that, but I don't have the full set of the letra sets. But one thing I want to start off by is that if you have a reference book and you have markers, one of the ways of doing some tests to see the properties of the markers is to put it in your reference book so that you know exactly how water soluble your markers are. Not only do you see how water soluble they are, but you have what you've got on a grid, and then you can do some tests on them as well. So I've got lots of tests here, and they are to do with water, white and clear gesso, matte medium and gloss medium over the top, underneath, moulding paste, and then to just spray with water. So if we want to have a look at the different things that water soluble markers can do, this is definitely a must for you. And the reference book course deals with all of your products, but this is just what I did for letra set markers. And that course is available at crazyislanduniversity.com, and it's the reference book, mixed media reference book course, and I highly recommend you doing it. Now, to get into doing this, I just have some 220 GSM watercolor paper just in a little pad A5, and I've just drawn a couple of little flowers on that because I want to show you a few things about what I'm talking about. Now, when you use water-soluble markers, it depends what paper you use. So if you're going to use, for example, copy paper, there's no watercolor sizing on that. So you can understand that your marker will immediately soak into this paper and be hard to work because this paper is not designed for using water-soluble media. Now you have to get into the thinking of, just because they're markers doesn't mean that I have to use cardstock like regular markers, because it's thicker and it works better to absorb and it doesn't pill. When you're using water soluble markers, probably the best thing to think about is using some kind of water or sized paper, watercolor paper. It doesn't have to be really, really thick, but you have to be able to work the media on the paper, and that is the one big thing. The second point that I will show you as I go on is you need to seriously think about how long you leave your markers before you activate them with water. So I'm just going to put a water activation, an aqua pen that's got water in the nib right next to my page as I'm starting this, and I'm using the colour cadmium orange. I actually don't think you can get that anymore. So what I'm just doing here is very, very quickly putting some colour in here. Now what I want to show you is, I haven't blended that yet, but this is what happens doing it fast, and you just want to blend those colour gradients in. So as I go longer, you can still see that the water can be dragged, and then I can drag some water out by cleaning off my brush and creating a light spot there. Now of course, while it's wet, or even when it's dry, I can go back and add more in. and clean my brush off and just really blend that in. And what you want to see here is, do my lines blend out? The main thing that I want you to think about whenever you're using water-based markers is, do my lines blend out? And I'll get a little pad and show you exactly what I'm talking about. So when you use a line of colour on your watercolour pad, and I'm going to use dark colours here because I think it will suit my purposes very well. I have a line and another line and another line. And I'm going to label them as soon as I can, but then you want to throw your media onto that line straight away, and you really want to bring it and see how fast or how much you can work that paper and try and work the original strokes out of it. Can you work the original stroke out of it? That's immediately. So this one here will be 1 minute, and this will be 2 minutes. So what we're allowing these other ones to do is dry. So I'm going to clean my brush off so that it's just got no pigment in it now. And it's been a minute since I've done that, so I'm going to do that now. And again, I'm just working the pigment. I'm using a round scrubbing motion to essentially move the pigment out of where I've applied it with the marker and apply it and move it around the paper. Now I've got to wait just another minute and we'll see how much you can move and how much of the line that you can see when we move this. Alright, it's now been 2 minutes, so one thing that I want to talk to you about here is the lines gradually get darker the longer you leave that pigment to dry, because it starts to set within the fibres of the paper. Now that is something that you need to think about if you're doing a larger project. If you noticed when I did this, I laid the 2 lots of pigment down first and then I started to work it. Now if I start to work this again, it will work because I've been using proper watercolour paper. On a lot of other papers it won't work. And I can continue to rework that. But if you have a really close look, and I'll come in closely, a lot of my original strokes can still be seen, and there's no clear meshing between this cadmium orange here and the sunburnt yellow here, and I'd have to work that transition quite a lot. But remember, I laid them down very, very fast. But you can see too that it can get a little bit sketchy and splotchy, and so what I generally use these markers for is in combination with lots of other things, because I may want to have the depth of colour, but they may not shade as perfectly well. So let me just give you a closer idea here, and I'll just zoom out just a little, and I'll just pop in a darker one here. So the way that I use these is I'm just going to feather this in now. So I'm going to feather in, and then the way that I use them is I drag the pigment. So I'll work that pigment when it's still wet and then drag it down to get my gradings, because as a watercolour artist I like to have light and shade, and that's why I love watercolour, because you can achieve it so effortlessly. Now, one of the things that you can see now is there does not appear to be a grading as such, a joining of the pigments. You can actually tell that because I had that feathery note, and I can just keep extending a little bit more and a little bit more out, drag that pigment out of where I've applied it, and then just blend it in again with water. And this is why watercolor paper is very important for water-based media. And so then you're starting to have that beautiful light and shade, and you've done it really, really, really quickly. So I'm going to give you an idea now of how you would then do that with what you've got on the top. That's just a plain red on the bottom. So what I'm, and you know, just using these little scrubby strokes just to apply it so that it's not an unbroken straight line. So now I'm just going to add in right into here some orange, because I'm going to change that color a little bit. Now let's apply the water, and we're going to start out from the edges again, and we're going to wet it down and drag it out. So I'm getting it dragged into this edge of the flower so that there's not a clear marker edge, getting in and re-wetting the edges here, and now I'm going to drag this through. And I'm using that scrubbing motion to get that ink out of the paper again. And again, you'll use that scrubbing motion to really blend the edges of your markers if you don't want to see that you ever had a marker there. That's why having watercolor paper is so darn important. You can see I've gone over the edge and the difference between the two. So now I'm just going in, blending it more, blending it more. You can take pigment out with watercolors. You can clean your brush off, dry it off, and then take pigment out. So I'm taking that pigment out, washing the brush off again, and just blending out from that part now. Again, take the pigment out and just blend it out, and then blend it back in. Okay, so you can see the difference in the richness in colour when you've then done the two petals. So if I was to do this in two tones of purple, we'll go to the other side of the flower and we'll have a look. Now I've got a mauve and a puce, and they are quite different. See, the first thing that I notice is with these markers that these particular colours are nowhere near as strong, and so you have to work them differently. For my mind, their deeper colours are what I particularly like to shade in, unless I'm doing flesh tones. And before that dries off, throw in this colour. Change the colour underneath, deepen it out, it just deepens it out. The two colours will blend, and then you've still got that jagged edge to do something with in the middle. Now let's apply the brush, and of course it's clean water, and start dragging that pigment into where the petal joins. Just drag the pigment around, let it mix together. Get your aqua brush and really sharpen up your edges, let the joining work. There's an awful, now you can start blending and dragging, scrubbing this line, blending and dragging the pigment into the middle. Now, even amongst the same family and brand of markers, not all things are equal. So I just want to let you know that this purple here is not blending as easily as the reds and oranges. And I've just got a couple, this is good watercolor paper, and I've got, you can see a couple of the pills here. So I'm just getting them off. You can't see any pills in that, but you can in this. And you're starting to see the sizing in the paper. That blotchy look is the sizing in the paper. So you have to think to yourself, well, what is well suited? And we'll let that one dry. This is all about playing and blending and playing and blending. And you may layer on top of that. I often use these underneath pencil layers because I want to add the vibrancy of these markers and then add a pencil on top. And I think that that is a great thing to do. And look, you can then have a look at two really, really different colours. Where you're tonally trying to have a look. So I've got here twilight blue and teal, because of course I love teal, and I'm just going to do them in a small petal here. I'm going to do the twilight blue on the outside, and here I'm just going to apply some shading down this part of the leaf. And then I'm going to use this marker to come in and go over here a bit. To give some difference in the tone of the leaf. Make sure I've got all the purple out. So the first thing I'm going to do is go down and have a look at my transition here while it's still wet. But drag some of that colour down and make sure that this looks like a pretty smooth transition before I start dragging the colour out. Now I'm going to work that colour. Now there's a dark spot of colour here, so you want to drag it out of there and have a look at the lines. You just want to work those lines now in and around. So you can get your brush and really work them into the middle. And it often goes about the direction that you're going. So you're moving that pigment into the middle. And breaking up lines. Okay, so the transition between those two colours has gone quite well. But of course I've got two little bits of pilling there, having to work that paper, because you have to work these colours here, you had to work more than what you had to work these colours here. These colours here, the pigment was stronger, there's just, you know, you compare apples with apples and you find even amongst your markers that not all of them are the same, and you'll notice that some colours are far more vibrant and some colours are not. And I'll give you an example. So here I've got eggshell, and I'm going to put that in with sunburst yellow. So I've got some sunburst yellow here, and I'm just going to bring it down and really feather it so that there's some good gratings here, and then I'm going to throw in the eggshell, which is significantly lighter, but you can see that marker's already dragging, so I'm just going to add that in here so that there is a lighter layer of ink, right? You can see that layer of ink. So now the idea is to drag it and the lighter layer of ink just provides you with a constant ink base to work with and not just plain paper. So the two inks should blend just that little bit easily. And just get them right until they're not looking nearly as splotchy. So I've just let it dry for a little while, and of course it's just not as graded as well. I think it's better, for me I prefer it when it has no ink in the middle, but that's just me. And if you have a look at these tests now, they're very dry. You can see the gradual darkening of that strip. So it's important to get your inks when they're wet. So now I'm going to use a different kind of marker from the Letrasets, and I'm just going to do a project. This is a water-soluble marker, but they pretty much say the ink does not stay on the paper. It's not as vibrant as the Letrasets. So my thought is I'm just going to give it a red hot go. These are the koi, and I tend to use them underneath things rather than just on their own. And I've only had these for a little while, so there's still that element of just learning how to use a product. So I'm just testing different ways of shading with these. All the better to test the way that they blend. I'm quite liking this one. I'm using the darker vein in the middle to create pockets of light. I think that's blending quite well, allowing the line and the light to just pick up, and then you can get your darker one back in if you really want to. While the water's wet, you really want to just drop more of that colour in. You can certainly do that. Leach that colour off and just blend this more. I kind of like that. And this is just about playing and just seeing exactly what your markers will do. I think you have to test and see what they will do and the properties that they have to really be able to work them in a way that you like. And again, I find the darker colours blend better than the lighter. I don't know if it's just me, but I find that I work better with the darker colours than the light. So it's interesting, you get the different kind of gradings and how you want your petals to look overall. Try a different kind of purple. And a pink. And this is me just playing, seeing how they work and how they blend together. Because they're markers, but they're also water soluble markers. So you might really want to see how what colours blend together. Can you make new colours with your markers? And what kind of blendability do they actually have between the two, the light and the dark? It's funny, isn't it? We can try lots of different things. So now I'm going to try something a little bit different. We'll go in lighter again. Looks interesting already, and we'll blend it. And one thing I want to point out to you with markers is that with the type of brush nibs that you have, you can have extremely fine detail in there. So if you want to have all the feathery bits around here, you can definitely have that. And you do not have to water activate them, but this is the way that they work really well. That's a really nice petal again. Let's try a different purple, a blue purple. So blue purple. With a lighter blue purple. See, and I'm blending them together with a lighter again. And I'm going to blend the pigment inks very well up here. Right, let's add some water to that. I'll zoom this one in. And what I'm hoping from this is that new colours are formed and the light and shade is just accentuated, not having to be created solely with the water. So my thoughts with this petal up here is that we again will have a base colour and we will just blend those together. I love the blendability of the yellows and the oranges in almost any brand. They are just great. And I love them. Oh, I'm at the bottom of my page. Let me just move that. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is just going to not draw the actual side in, and I'm going to just grade these down until I get to the darkest. So that there is no set outline to the petal. And let's see what this gives us. You can tell I didn't change my brush there. A little bit of yellow. Because the pink won't necessarily look really, really pink. You just got to see what your brushes do and what your markers do. See, I'm not happy with that. I don't think it looks very good at all. So for my mind, you know, I prefer not to have that kind of thing. Let me try just pink. So I'm just going to put this lightest pink up in here. And then a slightly darker pink and immediately just blend them in. Now with your lighter colours, that's blended really, really well, and the darker colour has not blended with it. So what you need to do is try and find your colours that are on the same shading. Now that's quite a blue pink, and I don't have really another blue pink along that line, so probably some of these fleshy colours might be better when looking at, these are all in my fleshy tones, when you're looking at three colours that might work well together. Let's try them here. So you've got a very light pink, and then we're looking at a fleshy, and then we'll just try the colours out. And they might not look brilliant here, but they might blend incredibly well together just to give beautiful shadows. It's a different thought again, isn't it? It's funny how we think about these things and work through how the watercolours work. For my mind, you know, I use these and I layer them a lot with pencils and use other media with them. It's very, very, very rare that I will ever use them completely on their own as a true mixed media artist. So I encourage you to really play with your markers and give them a red hot go. Whatever water soluble markers that you have, just play around with them, find how they blend for you. Use your aqua brushes, or if you don't have an aqua brush, use a normal brush with a well of water. But be aware that these, you can just keep pressing them and they'll clean their brushes out. But your water, if you're using a well, your water will get gradually dirtier and dirtier, and those colours will mix. So that's my lesson on blending water soluble markers today. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you've got any suggestions, I'm very much up for suggestions. I want to teach what you want to learn. So leave me a suggestion in the comments below. Okay, learn something new today. It keeps you young.